Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and on this edition of L'Chaim, I have the pleasure of sitting with one of the most interesting personalities on the American scene and a most passionate and committed Jew, Herb London, who has a most impressive record as a conservative activist, commentator, author, academic. Herb is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was president of the Hudson Institute, where he's still president emeritus. He was a dean at the Gallatin School at NYU, and he's currently a professor of humanities at NYU. And Herb has also been involved in New York politics, having been a candidate in the race for mayor of New York and for governor of the Empire State. Currently, Herb London is president of the London Center for Policy Research, and he's also the author of a new anthology entitled Leading from Behind the Obama Doctrine and the U.S. Retreat from International Affairs, a book which presents a whole host of articles and opinion pieces relating to various aspects of the president's 8 years in office. And Herb, it is wonderful having you at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction.
There's so much I want to know about you. I want to begin at the beginning. Who the heck are you? How did you become Herb London? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Brighton Beach.
Brooklyn.
Yes, in Brooklyn. One out of every 8 Americans lived in Brooklyn at one point in his life, and I'm one of them. My parents moved to Queens when I think I was about 11 years old, and then I went to Jamaica High School, and then from Jamaica High School to Columbia.
So you and I are both Columbia grads.
I'm a little older.
He's just a touch older. By the way, I now know that Herb played varsity basketball at Columbia. Those were very fun years. And then you graduate Columbia, and then where did your life take you?
Well, then I was looking for my Lincoln Brigade. I wasn't sure of what I would do next. And so I traveled the world. I played some basketball, some semi-pro basketball. I know that this is going to sound very odd. I had a hit rock and roll record in 1959.
You wrote it?
I didn't write it.
You sang it?
I sang it.
What was it called?
We're Not Going Steady. We're not going steady because we're never alone. I can't even love you on the telephone. I mean, very profound lyrics.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Did you play an instrument?
I pretended to play the guitar, but I was very much a part of this early rock revelation.
Did you have a band or something?
I didn't have a band. I sang on my own. In fact, one of the things that was interesting about that, in 1957, even 2 years earlier, when I was still in college, 59 I was as well, but in 1957, a fellow gave me a song to sing, and I loved the song. I recorded it, and I had signed a contract with a company called Buzz Records. Buzz decided, however, to cover the song by someone named Al Hibbler. And that, had I recorded that song, my life would have changed profoundly because it was Unchained Melody. I was the first to actually sing Unchained Melody. I still have the 78 of Herb London singing Unchained Melody.
It's amazing the twists life takes, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But it was, I did take the money that I generated from that song, We're Not Going Steady, and I did go to graduate school. So
Where?
I went to NYU.
In which field?
History.
Okay. What kind of Jewish background did you have growing up?
Well, my parents came from a kind of socialist tradition. So even I would go to temple, but generally on holidays. My father thought of himself as a kind of American Lenin. He was going to change America. And keep in mind that I have a relative, very famous relative, who was the first socialist ever elected to the United States Congress, named Meyer London, who was the founder of the Workmen's Circle and, of course, the founder of the Forward.
Okay. Did you have a Jewish identity?
I had a Jewish identity, yes.
Okay. And have you felt that this Jewish identity obviously has stayed with you your whole life?
Without any question.
Okay. So I'm looking at your background. Again, you're a Columbia kid. I'm imagining, and you tell me if I've got it wrong, I'm imagining if I had known you in your 20s, you would have skewed liberal. Is that fair?
Mayor, absolutely.
Okay. At some point, Herb, you, a liberal Jewish kid whose father is a socialist, moves towards the conservative perspective. I want to know how that happens.
Well, it's an interesting story, and there are a lot of factors that account for it. Number one, my father was very friendly with someone named Irving Firestone. I.F. Stone. I.F. Stone Weekly. I.F. Stone Weekly. I.F. Stone, of course, was working at the KGB, but we didn't know that. I didn't know that. I would read this document as if it were the Bible, and I could commit it to memory. And then in 1966, I got a Fulbright to Australia. I go to Australia, and I'm traveling that part of the world where there were American troops deployed during the Vietnam War. And wherever I went, I said, how terrible that the United States is here, this imperial force. And they look at me as if, where are you from? What kind of Martian are you? Thank God for the American forces that are here. It's the only way to create stabilization in this part of the world. We need American forces here. I mean, I started to ask myself a lot of questions, forced into asking myself questions. And then I became very friendly with a man named Herman Kahn, who some would regard as the founder of nuclear deterrence. And then Herman introduced me to people like Bill Buckley and Irving Kristol, and Irving became a very close friend of mine. So these were factors that all played a role in changing my perspective on the world. So I was mugged by reality.
Okay, by reality.
Mugged by reality.
At what point or how do you become involved in New York State politics, New York City? You, for a moment, it looks like you're going to run for mayor, and then you are going to run for governor, I believe, on the conservative ticket. So you're Republican conservative, but how do you ultimately get to the point where you want to run for office?
First of all, my wife would describe it in the following way, and she's probably more right than I am. And she would say it's a function of midlife crisis. It was the blonde and the red convertible, or it was going into politics. She said,
and
I preferred
the politics.
Yeah, so it was a question of going into the politics.
Roughly how old are you?
About 50.
Okay.
And I'm kind of Don Quixote. I'm fighting against windmills. I'm challenging windmills, recognizing the fact this is an uphill struggle. In a place like New York, they're not going to embrace a Herb London. So it was very obvious but it was an interesting encounter. And when I ran for mayor, there were two other Republicans who were running at the same time. One named Ronald Lauder, who was throwing a lot of money into that primary.
Right.
And the other was Rudy Giuliani, who already had name recognition. All I had was a kind of gift of debate. So I enjoyed engaging them in debate.
You were terrific.
Well, I don't know about that.
You were terrific.
You're kind to say that. But it was not, they had so many advantages. It was not really a contest.
And you knew that going in.
I did. I had a very good idea of what I was getting into. But as a consequence of these debates that we had and my getting to know a lot of people in politics, the Republican Party asked me to run in 1990. And when I met with Pat Barrett, who was then the chairman of the party, he said, you've got the nomination. Now, I'm a registered Republican. I'm not a registered conservative. But in order for anyone to win in New York State, you have to bring the two lines together. So I asked the Conservative Party, would you give me the nomination? They said, yes, we would. So that's how I got, you needed a Wilson
This
Pakula.
made news. I remember this very, very well.
Right. So then I was running as the Republican and conservative candidate. 5 minutes to midnight against Mario Cuomo. 5 minutes to midnight, the Republicans decided that they wanted someone who would put a lot of money into the campaign, and found this character named Pierre Renfrey. Renfrey promised them several $1 million that he was going to put into the campaign. They said, well, you match that. Well, I didn't have $7 million. Silly. Plus the fact I knew that Renfrey wasn't going to give him the money. All he did was promise the money. And then Renfrey got the nomination, and I decided I would teach the Republicans a lesson. And I would run on the conservative line.
Right.
So I ran on the conservative line, coming very close to defeating the Republicans, generating more votes as a third-party candidate for governor than any in American history. Upton Sinclair didn't get more in California. Weike didn't get more in Connecticut. Even Jesse Ventura, our wrestling friend from Minnesota, didn't get more votes than I did. And it was all done on a $160,000 budget. Now, $160,000 in a New York State campaign is a drop in the proverbial ocean. It really is nothing. Mario Cuomo that year spent $16 million. Renfrey spent $14 million. I came with just within a few thousand votes of defeating Renfrey. So it was, in some sense, a very interesting experience for me.
What did you learn about American politics, being inside it, so to speak, in these two situations, elections, you're running? But Herb, what do you understand as a result of your political experience about how American politics works. And I ask you that because as you and I are sitting here today, many Americans are just miserable with the political system. And we're meeting Donald Trump as president. He's a new president. Many people just loathe Donald Trump. There are some people who adore him. But he's having horrible problems. I'm not asking you about Donald Trump yet.
I understand.
I'm asking you about the system as a whole, which I believe was the reason why Trump wins in the first place. Americans are sick and tired of what they consider to be a corrupt, dishonest political system. You were inside. What can you tell us?
Mark, I think your observation is a very good one. I think most Americans are very cynical about politics, and it's understandable that they are. Many of the people that I met, the professionals, including some of those who are in elected positions, were really disgraceful. Whenever I would give a speech, I would generally face some of my colleagues in the Republican Party and Conservative Party, and they would say, "Do you really believe that? I mean, it's a passionate speech, but you don't really believe that stuff. It's just an instrument for getting elected." I said, no. I don't say things unless I really mean them. Well, I was considered to be such an outlier, people couldn't get over that. And that was one of the things that was very illuminating for me, that most people are so skeptical about politicians, they can't believe someone who would tell the truth. They can't believe someone who's sincere. They just do not accept that because it is so unusual to find in the political game. And I found that the average person, by and large, has more common sense than most people understand. I mean, I love walking into a beauty parlor, sitting down with some women, and simply talking to them. What's on your mind? Tell me about the things that you care about. And I would love sitting down with a group of truckers in a bar somewhere in Buffalo and start talking about the state of the economy and the kind of problems that they're facing. For me, these were always extraordinary moments. Really, I learned a lot. I learned an awful lot. And the thing about the Donald Trump campaign, if I can bring this full circle,
Please.
I think that Donald Trump has some limitations. He's a flawed candidate in many ways. But the one thing that he has come to understand, there's something called the forgotten American. And this is an American who pays his taxes, takes care of his kids. He's been hurt by the economy in the United States, largely because he has not been able to keep up with the technological revolution. Schumpeter talks about creative destruction. This fellow is on the destructive side of that equation. And if you lose your job and you were working at Bethlehem Steel and you got 3 kids and you're 55 years old and someone is saying to you, well, you're lucky if you can get a job at Walmart's for $15 an hour, you're angry. And you're saying, who in Washington cares about me? Who worries about me? I mean, I know they worry about where someone urinates, and they worry about, Black Lives Matter, and they worry about all of the exceptions in American life. But what about me? I fight our wars. I love America. I salute the flag, and no one cares about me. Why is that? That person was looking for a voice. Donald Trump, better or worse, has become the voice of those people. This is the disenfranchised, the dispossessed, the forgotten American. And he used that expression. Now, forgotten American was used by William Graham Sumner, and it was used by social Darwinians to suggest these are people who should be outside the mainstream. Roosevelt, FDR, picked it up and used it very cleverly by talking about plutocrats in America who control America. And he said, you're the forgotten American, the plutocrats control your country. Trump now said, you know something? These guys on K Street, these lobbyists who march up and down K Street, they earn $10 million a year. They write your legislation. They're responsible for the direction of the country. They don't care about you. And I'll tell you, this resonated in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And I learned that in 1990. I learned that. I got it exactly that way. If I can tell you one curious story about this. Rabbi Schneerson is someone that I went to see, largely because all political candidates go to see him to get a good luck.
The Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Right, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, to get your good luck $1 bill. So I went to see him in 1990. And he looked at me and he said, are you Jewish? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you know what year this is? 57, whatever it was, 57, 50. He said, no, I don't mean that. I said, Rabbi, I don't know what you mean. He said, well, each year, among Lubavitchers, we name a year after an animal or an event. And 1990 is the year of the miracle. I said, that's very interesting. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, it's going to mean a lot for you. Well, I said, aside from the fact that my mother thinks I'm a miracle, there's no one else who does. He said, no, you do not understand something. I'm going to tell you something. Listen very carefully. And he had these piercing eyes. I mean, you felt yourself gravitating to this man. He said, what I'm going to tell you is, no matter how many votes you think you're going to get more votes. A few days after I met the rabbi, I was on McLaughlin and Friends. And McLaughlin said to me, how many votes do you think you will get as a third-party candidate in New York? And you know the way McLaughlin spoke. I said, well, sir, the most votes ever obtained by a third-party candidate running for governor is about 300,000. He said, do you think you'll get 300,000? I said, I'm going to get a lot more. He said, oh, you're rather cocky. I said, no, sir, I'm not cocky. I spoke to someone who speaks to a higher authority, and he told me no matter how many votes I'm going to get more. Well, election day comes, November. I get a call from Mr. McLaughlin. Who is this person you spoke to? 1 million votes? 1 million votes? Almost inconceivable. So it demonstrates something about, one, this kind of Jewish mysticism.
Yes.
And the role that the rabbi played in my life. I told that story at his funeral, by the way, at Schneerson's funeral, because it was very profound. It was rather interesting.
Mm-hmm. By the way, speak for a moment about how you feel the character of the far left is now behaving. And again, I come out of the liberal tradition, the Democratic Party. I am very disappointed, embarrassed, and alienated by certainly the far left within the Democratic Party, which has taken a remarkably anti-Israel stand. And I feel that it now resorts to a rhetoric and sometimes violence, Herb, that once would have been unthinkable in my mind for my party. I also grew up through the Nixon years where we were so proud of the Democratic stand. We are a nation of laws. We are a rule of law, not of men. You follow the law. You don't like the law? Change the law. We fought a civil rights movement in which the whole goal was following, Kennedy and Johnson. We're going to change the law and implement a different legal system. It was no longer legal to separate, to discriminate. Today, I'm looking at the left, the panoply of the left, which tells me they're not going to obey the law. They don't care what sanctuary cities are or not. They don't care how states and federal government is supposed to interact. I see people willing to say and do despicable things, and I see now the left saying the right has no right to speak. That was once us, and we argued. You can't stop free speech. To be a liberal means you stand for the fact that difference of ideas and opinions in the university setting, sharing of ideas, that was what made America great. All of a sudden, if you're on the right, if you're alt-right, mid-right, I don't care. We got university kids preventing people from speaking, preventing Jews from speaking on behalf of Israel. I'm at Columbia University, where you and I went to school. I go to watch Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, addressing at Lerner Hall, an auditorium full of kids. And every 2.5 minutes, a group stands up and tries to shut him down, representing Palestinian perspective. And Danon says to him, Herb, stay. Don't walk out. Stay and talk to me. Tell me what you feel. Dialogue with me. Let me try to answer you. Nope. One after the other. You can't speak. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and out they walk. Now, I am very upset with the fact that mainstream Democrats, the Hillary Clintons, the Barack Obamas, the Chuck Schumers, they aren't speaking out against what I now consider to be liberal fascism.
Well, the word liberal fascism was used by Jonah Goldberg in a rather interesting book, and I think there is something to it. I was raised in this Democratic Party and still love the old Democrats that I remember, the Scoop Jacksons and the JFKs and the FDRs and the Hubert Humphreys. I admire those people tremendously.
Give me chills. They all give me chills.
And I feel the same way today that I did in those days. However, the Democratic Party, as I suggested before, is a different organization. It's no longer a party that represents any of the interests that I have. And don't even regard it as an American party. It's a post-American party. It's a party that looks to the world for some answers. I don't get a passport from the world. I get a passport from this country. I love America. I don't love the world. I think that in many respects, Western civilization, I'm going to say something quite controversial now, Western civilization is superior. I believe that.
In what sense?
I'm going to give you one illustration. It was given to me by a friend of mine, but I think it's a rather poignant illustration. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a good friend of mine. Ayaan Hirsi Ali was supposed to marry a man 40 years her elder, and this was a marriage that was arranged by her family.
You should describe more about who she is. It's very important.
She wrote a very famous book about her experiences in the Muslim world.
She's
she has
a Muslim
been a liberator,
woman.
and she's been the liberation. She's the Joan of Arc for the liberation of Muslim women. So she was living in Somalia, and then they moved to Saudi Arabia. She was supposed to marry a man, an arranged marriage. She decided after having a forced clitoridectomy, she decided to run away from home. She goes to Holland, and she creates a life for herself in Holland. In fact, she runs for political office and gets elected. And of course, there's the famous event with Van Gogh, where Van Gogh is killed after making a film about Muslim women, and there's a knife in his chest, and this piece of paper on the knife says, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali is next. So she has to live in a jail cell in order to continue her life in Holland. One day, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is walking down a corridor with a friend of hers, male friend of hers. They come to a door. He opens the door and he says to her, "Ladies first." She stands there, paralyzed. "What did you say?" He said, "Ladies first." Perfectly normal and gentlemanly things to say. She starts to cry. I never heard an expression like that. My world, women are last. In a court of law, we're half of a man. We're always last. I have to walk behind men. What do you mean, ladies first? He said, I didn't know it would mean so much to you. He said it was just a common expression. At that moment, she said, the West is best. The West is better than other civilizations. It has manners and morals that other people should adopt. And so I know in the world of ethnography and in the world of anthropological relativism, this is a terrible thing to say.
You're a racist, Herb.
Yeah, I believe that these are patterns of behavior that are superior. Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to women, women should be treated in this manner. I cannot accept the idea that women have to be treated as inferiors, that they can't leave their home in Riyadh unless they're accompanied by a male. I cannot accept the idea that a woman cannot drive an automobile unless she gets permission from her husband. I cannot accept that. So when people tell me, well, it's just a different way of life. No, it's not a different way of life. It's an inferior way of life. Women should not be treated in this manner. And then you think about the abuse, the honor killings, and you think about these forced clitoridectomies. It's barbarian. It's barbarian. And so I cannot tolerate that under any circumstances. So there's a deep-seated humanitarian impulse that I feel is very strongly about the world that we're living in. And that is the real crusade in the future. It's not only Trump, and it's not only the forgotten American. It's to recognize the Western tradition, what is important about this nation. And I'll come back to university life for a minute, if I may. One of the real problems I have with university life is that university professors who have now engaged in specialization, trivialization, and politicization no longer have any appreciation of the West. They don't live with Rembrandt. They don't live with the great traditions of Mozart. They don't live with Beethoven. They do not live in a world where Socrates existed. They don't know that world. And that is the world that inspired the West. That's what students who go to a university today should understand, that there is a tradition that we have an obligation to transmit from one generation to another because it is so superior. Mm-hmm. And look, that's not to say there aren't extraordinary things to read in the East.
Absolutely.
Upanishads, dialects. I mean, I can go through all of the wonderful literature in the East. But it still is our civilization that we have an obligation to retain.
Mm-hmm. I asked you before, how did you go from becoming a Democrat to becoming a Republican? And I want you to talk one more moment about that. Because most Democrats feel that Republicans do not care about people, that they're not supportive of government programs which help those who are the underclass and the underprivileged, that Republicans are more interested in programs that basically reflect the upper crust of society, but when it comes to education, child care, women's rights, the poor, health insurance for those who can't afford it, the Democratic Party sees itself as, in principle, a party that believes government's job is to provide a safety net for those who otherwise would be out in the cold. And it resonates within the Jewish tradition because it reflects the prophetic concern that you must care for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. The word stranger means the person who is other than you. We are to care for the other. And there's a feeling that the Republicans would put into place programs that would cut education, cut culture, cut child care, cut health care, cut benefits for those who without government assistance will be cold and hungry and homeless and lonely. And that's the image. There are people who really see it as black and white. There's the black hat and the white hat. The Democrat is wearing the white hat. The Republican is wearing the black hat. And what happens, people believe, is there's an evolution. People grow up, and while they're idealistic when they're young and they want to wear the white hat, they become more interested in what motivates self-interest. And self-interest has less to do with helping others and more to do with protecting themselves. And therefore the image is these young Democrats take off the white hat and they put on the black hat. I want to know from you, where is that description inaccurate?
It's inaccurate in every fundamental way. In the 1960s, when LBJ was elected president in 64, he engaged in a war on poverty. And he said, we have an obligation to deal with the poor in the United States, to make sure no one in America goes hungry, to make sure that every opportunity is provided for people who were formerly poor and could not get out of the horrible cycle of poverty. He delivered a speech in the University of Texas that was among the most eloquent ever given about the rights of the poor and the desire on the part of our government to help. At that point, the poverty rate in the United States was 15%, recognizing the fact that poverty has some relationship to income, number of children in the family, and so on. What is the poverty rate in the United States today? 15%. How is it that after spending $20 trillion, I didn't say billion, $20 trillion, the poverty rate hasn't moved at all in the United States?
The answer is, Herb, it would have been worse if the policies had not been followed.
No one can know that. That's entirely speculative. In fact, I would argue it would be a lot better. Because if you would have said to me, give everyone in the United States at birth $20,000. $20,000 using 1960 dollars is not an insignificant sum of money. We could have saved a lot of money, and we could have done a lot of good, in eliminating poverty in America. You want to do something? Get rid of those programs. Those programs are designed for one purpose.
And replace them with what?
Replace them with the free market. There is nothing, look, the free market has its flaws. I recognize them. And I'm not, and they don't always accomplish the same goals. But the whole evolution of capitalism and the extraordinary wealth that's been created over the last 2 centuries hasn't come about because government has decided to use tax dollars and disseminate them properly. They've come about in large part because of ingenuity and because of the human ability to create something. I believe that all people possess that, but they have to be able to, it has to be able to flourish in an environment where freedom exists. When you impose government regulations on people, you take away their freedom. And it's not coincidental that we've had not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 generations living in poverty and the poverty cycle. Same families, time after time. How is it that these programs are supposed to get them out of poverty, but in fact want to keep them in poverty? Because there are a lot of people who have a stake in the retention of a poor population in the United States.
As you view U.S.-Israeli relations, both through the Obama years and now as we enter the Trump administration, where do you feel U.S.-Israel is? What worries you? What do you hope for?
Well, I mean, I am very worried about what transpired during the Obama years, where I felt Israel was indeed thrown under the proverbial bus. Obama thought that Israel was an irritant. I don't know if you remember an article that appeared in Atlantic Magazine when Obama was senator, and he described the Israeli nation as an infection. And he used metaphorical language of that kind to say that it is an interference in the development of the kind of relationship the United States should have with Arab nations. I knew at that point that Obama was the wrong person to be president of the United States if you cared about Israeli relations. A lot of things have happened in the interim years, including the fact that Netanyahu has had to reach out to Putin and has put himself in the position where he's allied himself with the Sunni nations. I said to you when we chatted before, if you would have said to me that a delegation is coming from Riyadh to talk about military affairs with some people in Jerusalem, I'd say, come on. I mean, are you in hallucinogens? It's not going to happen. Of course it happened. So we've seen a very significant shift in what the Russians used to call the correlation of forces. This is happening, and it's happening in Israel. And I think that it's been brought about in part because of Obama and the inability of the Israelis to rely on the United States. This will change with Trump. Trump has made it clear through Mr. Friedman that there is going to be a shift in the relationship. Even though it's no big deal, the embassy, that sign on the embassy, it's going to go from consulate to embassy. Just going to change the one word. That's all you have to do. Nothing else. Nothing is moving. The sign is going to change. Very important. And people are going to say, oh, the Arabs are going to be upset. Nonsense. Most of the Sunni nations don't care. Sisi has said, what difference does it make? Is this one of the 5, 10, 20 most important issues in the area? No one cares. In fact, they don't even care that much about the Palestinians. Palestinians have been used as a device by the Arabs to put pressure on Israel. But when you think about it, there's no such place, there's no such people. It's all an invention. We've invented something called Palestinians. We've invented something called a place called Palestine. It's Jordan. And of course, Israel conquers Jordan in the '67 war.
You've said it in part, but I want you to say it directly. Why is there no peace between Israel and the Palestinians?
There's no peace because, one, there is no desire on the part of anyone in the Arab world to say tomorrow, we will recognize Israel as an independent Jewish state. Not one person. And if you can't do that, then you can't have peace. And when Kerry stupidly said, well, you can't have democracy and a Jewish state, are you kidding? That's exactly what you have. You have a democracy and a Jewish state. It's absurd. And so my feeling about it is that we've got to, Jews who care about this matter, and that's a decreasing number, I might add, have to be able to stand up and make the argument as effectively as possible that the retention of a Jewish state is not only good for Jewish people, it's good for the region. It's good for the United States. It's good for the world. If you start looking at Nobel Prize winners, as I just happened to do about 2 hours before I met you, I was just looking at, there are 7 Arabs who have won the Nobel Prize. Millions of people in the Arab world. You start counting the number of Jews, there are more than 7 in one class of Townsend Harris High School in New York who won the Nobel Prize. I mean, what Jews have contributed to the world. You look at NASDAQ. NASDAQ is a Jewish stock fund. That's what it is. And what Jews have contributed to the world is extraordinary, overwhelming. And so Jews should take pride in that, just as they should take pride in the state. I told you when we chatted before, I'll never forget 1948, my father sitting at that Philco radio and tears running down his cheeks as the vote is taken in the United Nations. When they finally say Israel is created as a state, he is crying uncontrollably. And I'm a kid, I'm trying to console my dad. Dad, I'm so sorry what happened. And he said, these are tears of joy. I could not be happier. So for me, this is a kind of emotional attachment, recognizing the fact if you want to understand Judaism, Judaism, Israel, Israel, Judaism. That's the equation.
What would you have Israel do on the West Bank?
It's completely controlled by the Palestinians.
Does Israel withdraw?
No.
Does
Cannot.
Israel annex?
No. Well, maybe.
You went from no to maybe.
No, I went from no to maybe because Carolyn Glick provided me with a very, very good argument on this. And I could see some form of annexation. If you look at the total territory that the Israelis control in the West Bank, it's a very tiny sliver of land. It's not as if we're talking about a big piece of land. When Barack was president and he said, we'll give up 95% of the West Bank.
Prime Minister. Right, yeah.
Prime Minister. I mean, but that is a deal that should have been accepted. I mean, Ibn at that point, made the comment, Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And that was a missed opportunity. And had Arafat not been so doctrinaire, he would have accepted it. I mean, Clinton kept saying, do it, take it.
They can't.
Of course they can't.
That's the
it,
tragedy.
they can't. That's right.
A sad human tragedy.
It's the Jordan River to the Mediterranean.
Right.
That's all they can see.
That's right.
Nothing else.
That's right. What bothers me now, and in some way maybe you're the best person to ask, you've been inside government. Why didn't the Obama administration, why didn't the Bush administration, why didn't the Clinton administration, why doesn't the Trump administration understand it's no more complicated than what you just said? There's a people who cannot, not that they won't, they are unable emotionally, constitutionally, intrinsically, existentially. They're unable to ever acknowledge the legitimacy of a Jewish state. It's not about borders, not about settlements, anywhere from the Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. You said it so clearly. Herb, why doesn't everybody at the State Department, why doesn't the Vice President of the United States, why doesn't the President of the United States understand it? The Secretary of State, why don't they understand it as simply as it is, as simply as you said it? Why?
Well, I'm going to tell you about a conversation I had with Bush, seated. I was even closer to him than I am to you. The two of us are in the dining room, just the two of us, in the White House. And Abu Abbas had left his office. And he said, Herb, I believe in this man. I think we could work with him. I think he's someone very different from Arafat. I think we can make a deal. I started to smile. The president said, what are you smiling? What are you smiling at? I said, Mr. President, I have great respect for you, but let me tell you something. This is Arafat in the suit. This is a man who's not different. And I think that you would make a terrible mistake if you think you could make a deal. He said, I do think I can make a deal. I said, you're misguided. You really cannot. You cannot make that deal with Abbas. And if you think you can, you will introduce the same kind of inflammation in the Arab world that was introduced in Intifada 1 and Intifada 2, when people believed that they could bring about a deal, that you could overcome the human nature or the human appeal of the Arabs. I said, be a mistake. I said, Carter tried and failed. Clinton tried and failed. Patience. Maybe, I don't know, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the world looks very different. But it's not going to be different in your administration. He did get it.
Finally.
He did get it. He did come to that
Obama
understanding.
Didn't get it.
Obama never got it.
Kerry didn't get it.
Nobel Prize.
Will Trump get it?
Yes. I think, look, there are lots of things that you can say about Trump, and I've already said them. I mean, there are lots of things in the personal style that I'm not entirely comfortable.
You're not happy with.
I'm not comfortable.
That's simple.
I'm
You're not
comfortable.
happy with.
Right, okay, I'm not comfortable. But when it comes to Israel, I think his instincts are right. He had to throw that line out about settlements, and he did. But it was a throwaway line, because immediately afterwards, and then he said something rather silly in my judgment, but at least he did not talk about the two-state solution. Well, it could be a one-state solution, it could be a two-state solution, it could be a three-state solution. It was absurd. Absurd.
Absurd.
Absolutely absurd. One-state solution, Arabs want. I mean, we know what that is. You've discussed it. A two-state solution, it's dead. There's no way which a two-state solution is going to occur. So the status quo is about the best you can hope for. Maybe some form of annexation. Carolyn is a little crazy, but she's very smart. And I
Carolyn Glick.
Yeah.
Yeah. People say to me, Trump is so mercurial, you never know from one day to another what his policy is going to be. And I answer, you've got David Friedman and you've got Jared Kushner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Trump may waffle in other areas. I don't believe Friedman and Kushner and his commitment to Kushner will ever permit him, not even permit him, I don't think he wants to, in any way.
He's Jewish.
Betray Israel. Yeah.
I mean, you look at what are the daughter-in-laws? They're all Jewish. Everyone's Jewish, and his daughter is now Jewish. Everyone's Jewish. So, not that that means anything anymore, because in America, by and large, secular Jews don't care that much about Israel.
Okay, so we come full circle here. You have spent many years in a university context. You've been a dean at NYU. When you look at what's happening on campus today with the BDS movement, with SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, and for the extent to which in some universities, not all, but in some select universities, there is a virulent, violent sometimes, antipathy to Israel. What's your reaction? How do you view the BDS movement? And, you know, there are parents right now watching. Their kids are about to go off to college. What's your advice?
Look, I wrote a book about the BDS movement, the war against Israel, BDS movement, the war against Israel. The reason why I wrote the book is not because I'm going to explain anything that doesn't already exist. This fellow Barghouti, who is one of the founders of the current BDS movement, goes back many years, by the way, is very much an Israeli. Went to Tel Aviv University, got a master's degree in Tel Aviv. He was something of a rabble-rouser. He was going to be ousted from the university. They asked him to leave, and the Jewish faculty members came to his defense talking about academic freedom. And I admire that. But he's also a destructive figure. And it's also true that what you have is an attempt to demonize the state of Israel. It'd be one thing if, in fact, there were substantive conversations about what's going on. It's not really substantive. It is an attempt to delegitimize Israel as a state. That's the purpose. And to make matters worse, there are Jewish organizations that are complicit. J Street. And J Street argues, well, the BDS movement is very useful because it'll force Netanyahu into a more flexible position. And then the New Israel Fund, same sort of thing, where they believe that Jews have to come to understanding of the Palestinian position. I've often asked myself the question, why isn't it also appropriate for the Palestinians to understand the Israeli position? I can never understand why I have to understand the Palestinians, but they don't have to understand me. That always perplexed me. But leave that issue aside for a moment. If I'm a parent sending my kid to a university today, and the first thing they are going to read is Edward Said's Orientalism, I know what the result will be. They're not reading my book on BDS. That's not required reading. They're reading Edward Said. So you read Edward Said, Jews are exploitive, this is a colonial nation, it's illegitimate. So if I'm a sensible kid, I read this information, even though they don't know that Edward Said was a complete fraud. He claims he was a Palestinian throwing rocks over the wall. He was living the life of leisure in a Cairo suburb because his father was a very successful physician. But that's unimportant. He was handsome, he was charming, he managed to seduce Jewish women all over New York. Everyone, oh, this guy is so handsome, so charming, so cosmopolitan, and so dangerous. And now the book is as widely read as any book you would read in Middle Eastern Studies programs. So you go to see Khalidi at Columbia, talk about Columbia's Middle East Studies program. Who does he advise? Who did Khalidi advise? Who was one of his closest associates? President Obama. And when Obama talks about his Columbia experience, he said he was a political science major. The chairman of the political science department did not know who Obama is. But Obama said, I studied with Said. So what we're talking about here is, in fact, a calculated effort to undermine Israel. That's what it is. And in my judgment, this is what parents should understand. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read Edward Said. I'm not talking about censorship, but I am talking about understanding what you're getting into if you're studying Middle East studies in the United States.
I enjoy you so much. I could talk to you for hours and hours.
I think we have.
So this only has to be part one.
Okay.
All right? I thank you for giving me so much time.
Well, you've given me
and sharing. No, you're wonderful.
You've given me a lot of nachas here.
You're doing so much good. So you and I just have to be together often, and I
would look forward to it.
You have to be a home. One of your homes has to be JBS.
Okay.
It's a deal.
Well, it's a deal. We'll have to have you and your wife come over for Shabbos dinner.
That's lovely. There you have it. The thoughts of Herb London, president of the London Center for Policy Research, and the author of Leading from Behind, the Obama Doctrine and the U.S. Retreat from International Affairs, a comprehensive anthology of articles and opinion pieces that chronicle the Obama presidency. Well, you heard Herb London say so many things. I'd love to hear any reactions you have to any of the ideas, thoughts, whatever. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.